Welcome to another video tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at request entity. In the previous video, we took a look at request coordinate, and these two are very sort of similar, really awesome functions that you can use in your projects. So today, as I say, we're going to cover request entity. I'm going to quickly show you how to use it, how to get it to work, and then we'll cover ways in which you can use it. Now, request entity is a lot simpler if you're coming off of watching the request coordinate video. Request entity is a lot simpler to use. There's less parameters you have to pass in, and the only parameter that you have to pass in is optional. So as you see in a minute, it's very simple to use. So let's start with a quick, simple example. So I'm going to bring down the console, and I'm going to type $ent. So we're going to create a local variable called ent, and it's going to equal request entity. And that's literally all we need to type in regards to that. That would work in and of itself. Obviously, it's not going to do anything. So let's now also display message $ent. So what it's going to do is it's basically going to store inside $ent the entity we click on, and then it's going to display a message showing us the details of that entity. So if I press enter and run that command, you can see that the cursor has changed into the interaction cursor. This is sort of the cursor that you would see in game if you set an object to be interactable. But now this is the request entity cursor. And we've made it so that when we click something, it's going to store the entity inside a variable and then display to us the contents of that variable. So let's, for example, click on this bench here. We get a message box pop up, and this is what was inside $ent. So this is what gets captured with request entity. So we've got the object type. So in this case, it's an object because the bench is an object. We've got the model name, parked_bench. That's what I called the model that this is using. And then the coordinates. So this is where the model or where the entity is situated. Okay, let's run it again. And this time let's click on the grass here. We get that it's a tile this time. The model is grass_flat. And again, there's the coordinates. If we run it again, we could click on ourselves, for example. We can see we're a character, the model name, and where we're currently standing. So if you want to know the coordinate for something, like the coordinate of an entity, this would be another way of doing it. You can just quickly run this, click on something, let's say the skyscraper, and it will tell me where it is, what the model is, and whether it's an object, tile, or character. There are other things we can access. So for example, let's bring the console down and let's amend this particular command here. So instead of just returning $entity as it is, we could refine what it is we're looking for. So for example, I could say .model. So now all I want it to show me is the model of the entity I click on. Okay. So if I run that now and I click on the skyscraper, it just says skyscraper because that's the model name. If I run it again and I click on the park bench, then it just comes back with park bench. It's only showing me the model name. I could change this so that instead of bringing back the model, we could maybe bring back the ID if it has one. So for example, Bob here has an ID. In fact, that's his ID. Entity ID is Bob, but the bench doesn't have one. So if I click on the bench, it comes back as null, which basically means doesn't exist. Okay. So we can see whether things have got IDs or not. Let's try this book over here. Yeah, oh, it's null. Okay, should have an ID, but I must have taken it off. But you get the idea, right? Let's try something else. Let's say instead of .id, we could do .type. And now when we click on something, it will tell us whether it's a tile, an object, or a character. So this bush, for example, it's an object. Let's click on this path here. It's a tile. Let's click on Bob. He's a character, right? So we can find out whether, what type of things certain entities are. What else can we do? We could try animations. that will tell us what animation something has. So if I click on Bob, he's got attack, climb, death, idle. All these are all the animations he has. I don't think park bench is going to have any, so it's just empty, because there's no animations on that object. What else could we display? We could display the name. So if you've set the name for something, this is different to the ID. This is, the actual display name, if you will. I think Bob is Bob. Yeah, let's try clicking on ourselves. Justin. Let's try clicking on this bush. Doesn't have one. I didn't set a name for any of the objects. Although maybe the book might have one. Not sure. No. So it's just the model name. I'm trying to think if there's anything else worth showing before we move on. Obviously, anything that works with entity will work with request entity. So, let me just think, is there one last thing we could do that would be interesting to try? No, I think we'll move on. So that, in essence, is in its simplicity how this works. You just need where you're going to store it, and then once you've stored it, what do you want to do with it? In this case, we were just displaying a message. What we could do, let's go back to just handling the variable directly, and let's, instead of displaying the message, let's change this to remove entity. So now what's going to happen is everything we click on is going to be deleted. So if I click on this bush, it gets removed. If I click on this bench, it's removed. If I click on Bob, Bob goes. If I click on this book, the book goes. I can even click on the skyscraper, that goes. Click on this floor, that goes. The only thing you can't remove for obvious reasons is yourself. It'll come back and say it's an invalid entity because Kit's the player character. But anything, tiles, objects, characters can be removed with this particular command here. So at the moment, we're not checking whether we should be allowed to remove any kind of entity. Because at the moment, remove entity, because of this particular request entity here, where we haven't passed in a validation function, this is just going to basically remove anything you click on that's not the player. Now, you might not want, for example, to be able to delete tiles. That might not be something you want to allow. So this is where the validation functions come in, very similar to what we did with request coordinate. So let's take a look at the request entity validation functions now. So let's go to the script editor and let's make a new script called request entity. And let's go full screen on this so that we can see things properly. And let's go to the text editor mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of recreate what we did in the console. So entity equals request entity. This is one way you could do a filter. So we could just have request entity exactly like we did before. Then we're going to need to create a second variable called ent type, which is going to equal ent dot type. So once we've got the entity back, we want to just capture its type and store it into this variable. And now what we can do is we can say if ent type is equal to object, then remove entity ent end. So this simple script, what we're basically saying is grab any entity, so just click an entity and store it. Then in the second variable, grab the type of the entity we've just stored, and then we'll just check if the type is an object. If it is, then remove it. Otherwise, don't do anything. So if we apply and save that and run the game, now if we bring down the console and type exec rec entity, which is the name of my script, we get our hand cursor, interaction cursor, But if I click a tile, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't remove it. Okay, let's run it again. If I click Bob, it doesn't remove him because he's not an object. Okay, but if I now click this bench, it removes it because it's an object. Okay, so our script is now filtering only by object. So if we click on a tile or we click on a character, it's not going to delete those things because they're not valid. But if we click an object, then it is. Now, the only problem with this particular script at the moment is you'll notice that if we click something that's not valid, let's say we click on Bob, it ends the request entity and we can't click now on a bench or a bush to delete it. So it's a bit annoying that it sort of interrupts the request entity if you click the wrong thing. So let's change our code so that it works a bit more efficiently. And this is where the functions come in. So rather than doing it this way, what we're going to do is we're going to type function validate entity and $selected. We want to pass in what we're hovering over as we move the cursor over things. Let's just end the function. And then what we're going to want to do is store a variable. So ent underscore type equals $selected dot type. So as we hover over things, grab the type and store it into a variable, and then return $ent type equals object. So what we're basically saying there is, as we move the mouse cursor over entities, store the type all the time into this variable, and then only return a valid object if that type is an object. Okay? And then what we need to do is $ent equals request entity. And then this time we're going to pass in, this time we're going to pass in the parameter of our function name, which is validate entity. And then what we'll do is remove entity $ent. Okay? So what this will do is this won't even allow us to click something that isn't an object. And you'll see this in practice now. Let's play the game. And if we type execute request entity script, now as I move my mouse around, you can see that if I'm over a tile, I don't have the hand icon. If I'm over a character, like the player or Bob, I don't have a hand icon. But if I go over an object, the hand icon appears. So that means if I click on a tile, or I click on Bob or me, it's not going to end the request entity. But the moment I click on this bench, because it will be allowed, it can then carry out the rest of the script. So it will then remove the object and I can move again. Now it's important to know that while request entity is active, you can't move because it's waiting for you to click on something in order to store it rather than click on something to move. So just note that while you're in a request entity process, you're not going to be able to move your character. So once you've been able to successfully carry out a request entity, you'll be able to move again. So what might be a good idea if you're going to use this in your games is to create some feedback for the player just so that they're aware that this process is taking place. For example, let's say I've got a widget called tip, and let's just rearrange things a bit. Let's go full screen if we can. Oh, we can't seem to go full screen on this one. It's a bit annoying. So that'll have to do because I can't really see it at the moment. But let's go back to our script, and just before we run this request entity, let's show widget tip. And then once we've carried out that process, hide the widget tip. So in practice, it looks like this. So if we were to run our script, and now you get this widget that pops up saying select an object. Obviously this is a bit, I would resize this and everything, but I can't at the moment. But the point is this pops up to let the player know that they're in some special mode, which is why they can't move, because it's saying select an object. And then the moment I select an object, it deletes, the widget goes, and I can move again. Run it again. Yeah. So that's that. Let's go back to the code. So trying to think if there was something I wanted to mention before we move on. Don't think so. I think I'm going to move on. And then, yeah, there was one thing I was going to say. Obviously, at the moment, I'm just triggering these scripts by typing them in the console. But obviously, you know, as always, you would attach this to something to fire off this script. So we're about to do that in a second anyway. So I'm now going to switch map to this little one here. I'm just going to grab a coordinate where I'm going to spawn. So let's just start there. Go to our startup script, change the map, and paste that into there. Save that, close that, and go back to our request entity script. So let's show off something else now. Let's go back to this, and what I want to do is I want to demonstrate something which I need to set up. So give me a second just to cancel that. Let's go back to the map. I need to actually go to the voxel editor, and I need to edit this all object here. I'm going to go to the tags section, and I'm going to add a tag called paintable. And I'm going to do the same, save that. I'm going to do the same thing to this model here. Let's set this back to, where is it? Default. Go to the tags, and this should have paintable as well. So let's save that, go to our map, and I'm going to have to most likely replace these walls. So just give me a second just to quickly do that. Okay, so I've just put the walls into place, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this paint object here, and I'm going to put the script on its character interacts request entity, and then let's go and edit this script. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the function first of all, and what we're going to do is we're going to say return $entity, no sorry, not entity, $selected dot tags contains paintable. So what we're basically saying there is I only allow the entity that we're hovering over if the tags of that entity contains the tag paintable. If that's the case, then we want to obviously let's remove the widget tip for the rest of this demo. We're going to request the entity and store it in $ent. But this time what we're going to do is we're going to use the set entity texture function, and we're going to pass in $ent as the entity to change the texture of, and the texture is red. So what that's going to do is going to allow us to basically paint the walls of this room. So let's save the game and let's check how that works. So if we click on this paint bucket, we can't click on any of these tiles or this object or the player because none of those things have the tag paintable. But if we hover over the walls that do have that tag, you'll notice that I can click. So let's click on this wall here and it paints. Let's activate it again. And it's interesting, for some I have to look into the code. Sometimes it's not painting it, like this one. Oh, there we go. Weird. So let's activate that again. Let's try this corner one. Okay, so it's got a little bit of an issue there for some reason, but this bit's working, and it is setting the entity, but for some reason it's struggling to paint when I click. But there's another way that we could do this, because although this works, it's got a bit of an issue, which is, and let me sort of show you what that is in game. Actually, I'm meant to demonstrate. So let's click this paint bucket again, and let's click on one of these walls, this wall here, and we paint that wall. Now if we click on the paint tray again, notice how I could, in theory, paint this wall again, even though it's not really, you're not going to see anything, it's not going to actually do anything, it's just going to basically do the same thing, it's just going to color itself red again. But it seems to be working better now, and I've just realized that's the wrong shade, but never mind. You get the idea. We can paint this wall. We could basically paint all the walls. But the problem is, as I say, when you click on the paint tray, we could in theory repaint these walls, and the problem is that's because the paintable tag still exists on these walls, even though we've painted them. And the problem is, at the moment, you know, there's an error there. I wonder when that pops up. I'll have to look into that. But anyway, at the moment, until it gets changed, or unless it gets changed, we can't change tags within when the game's running. You can change the tags from the voxel editor, but you can't change them via script. So what we need is something that we can change via script. So another thing that we can do is, let's cancel this and let's go to our, I'm going to do this via the map editor rather than the voxel editor, because then I don't have to replace the walls again. Although having said that, I would have to place them again anyway, because, or not have to place them again, I'd have to do each and every single one. So I'll just edit the walls and place them again. I'll do that off camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up in the voxel editor again, but this time I'm going to go down to custom properties. I will add a custom property, which I've already got from the my previous attempt at this video, so never mind. Let's delete that and we'll add it again. We'll add a property, which is a Boolean. And this can be paintable. And it's going to start as true because obviously it should be paintable to begin with. And we want to do the same thing with this wall. So paintable should start true. Save that. And then let's go back to the map editor. And as I say, I'm going to have to delete these walls again and place them all again. So that's the walls put back in place with the paintable tag set on them, or paintable property set on them. So now we go back to our script. Go full screen. And we're going to change this script so that instead of return $selected tags, we're going to return $selected property paintable equals true. So only if that property is true, then is it an allowed selectable entity. Then once we've painted $ent, we can say $ent.property paintable equals false. So we invalidate each painted wall after we've painted it. Okay, so then when we next run this command and it validates the entity, this is going to be false now on that painted object. So I'm not sure what's going on with my mouse, but having some clicking issues. All right, so let's click on the paint tray. And now if we click on, let's say, this wall, it paints the wall. And if I click on the paint tray again, you see how it's invalid now. I can paint this one and I can paint that one, but I can't paint this one again because it's now false. The property paintable on this wall now is false. And then let's continue painting at least the rest of this wall. And now the whole of these walls are not paintable, but this one now is. You get the idea, yeah? Let's do one last thing, just for a bit of fun. Let's go back to our map and let's delete the paint bucket, and let's also delete the table, and I'm going to put a chair object in this corner. And what we're going to do is go to our script and make some changes. So first of all, we want to confirm that it is an object. So I'm going to go back to what we were doing earlier with $ent type equals $selected dot type, and then return $ent type equals object. So only allow an object to be selected as part of the request entity. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another function, which I'm just going to call val chord, and that's going to take $selected as well. Begin, end. What we want to do here is we want to check if tile $selected.x, and then just for speed, I'm going to copy this. $selected y, $selected z. Is equal to null, so there isn't one, then return false, end, and then we're going to have a couple more of these. But this one is going to be if the tile dot objects is not null, then return false, and if characters is not null, then return false. Otherwise, if all of that is fine, return true. Okay, and then once we've done our request entity, we're then going to say $chord equals request coordinate 0, 0, 0, 0, because I'm fine with the height. starting height, the height going down, the height going up, and the increment is going to be fine at 0, but we're going to pass in val underscore chord as the function, the validation function. That should be called something else because that's not going to work. So let's just call it, I don't know, XYZ. And then what we can do is we can do add object $ent $xyz, and then we'll leave the entity ID as blank. So if we run this now as a script and run the game, and let's just type exec rec entity. And now you can see that nothing apparently can be clicked on except for the chair because it's an object. So we're checking that we can only select an object. Then when we click on this object, it switches to request coordinate. And now we can place, or we can click a coordinate that doesn't contain an object and that is valid. So there can't be a null tile, and there can't be a character or an object already on the tile. But as soon as we click, oh, yes, that's a good error to show, actually. So we got this error. Let's talk about why this happened. So let's explain what that error is in case you encounter it. Let's go full screen. So when we do request entity, what we store inside this $entity here is the entire entity. So its name, its ID, its model, its animations, everything to do with that entity is grabbed by this request entity and stored inside this variable. But add object just wants the model. So what we're going to do is, we could try $ent.model. Let's try that. But if needs be, we'll make a second variable that just stores that first. But let's try doing that. Exec rec entity. Okay, so let's click the chair again. And then let's place the chair. Boom, there you go, that works. Cool. So now we've got a object duplicator. So it starts by allowing you to select which object you want to duplicate. And then where do you want to place the duplicate item? Let's put it in this corner over here. Boom, and there we go. So that's combining request entity and request coordinate. Okay, so you can start to see how you can put these things together. Let's do one more. In fact, let's just do the whole row while we're at it. Let's just click that, click that, click that, click that. And where we started with one chair, we've now got 6. So, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, if there was one other thing I could show, in fact, let's just do it for a laugh. At this point, though, I think you should pretty much get how request entity works and how you could use it. But I'll just quickly end out by doing one last thing if you want to continue watching, just to see another example. So what I'm going to do is quickly go back to the map editor. Let's delete the chair. Let's put an NPC character in. Let's say Bob. And let's change his behavior to movement area none, so he doesn't walk around. Let's just fill in this gap. And I think that's fine. So let's go back to our script. We don't need to validate the coordinate anymore because I'm not going to run request coordinate for this or add object. We are, however, going to store the entity. But this time, we want to check if the entity is a character. And obviously, we probably shouldn't allow the player. So we'll do that. I think the easiest thing to do is probably to do that down here. There's probably a way to do it in the function, but rather than rack my brain around how to exactly do that right now. I'll just do it down here. So we store the entity in request validate entity in $ent, and then we'll just check if $ent or this might work. In fact, I might just check this quickly. If ent equals player, then print. Just so I can see if that works. And then we'll know. Just good to be safe. But if I just run this again. So again, I can only now click on characters. Can't click on tiles. But I can click on Bob, but let's click on the player. Great, it printed yet. So it knows that the entity we click on is the player in this case. So what we want to do is check that if it's not the player. So if entity is not the player, then we want to set entity model $ent, and then I'm going to change Bob to Goblin Sword. So this could be, for example, a spell that changes, a person into a frog or whatever, or you could make them invisible because you could change into a different model that's, for example, blank. Let's go over here. Let's compile this first. Go out of full screen. You could have blank, But in this case, I'm going to change Bob into Goblin Sword when we click on him with request entity. So if you could imagine that we are, even though I'm doing it via the console, if you can imagine I'm clicked on a spell or something like that, or an ability, and then it says, choose who you want to cast it on. You click on Bob, and he becomes a goblin. Don't know why he moved. Let's run that again. Let's check that. There we go. That's better. So, again, another example of what you could do with it. The point is, there's so many things you could do with it. There's no point covering them all in this video. It's just really just to give you an idea of how it works, ways in which you can use it, and ultimately how you can validate what entities you're hovering over with this function here. So with that said, that'll wrap up this video. If you have any questions on this, feel free to ask on the Discord. But for now, I'll wrap up, as I say, this video. Thanks for watching.